Hi, everybody. This is Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy. I'm actually going to show you a little bit behind the scenes what I spent the weekend working on. I was working on our updated procedure on labeling. And part of labeling is your label that goes on your box, your label that goes on your sterile pouch, but also your labeling includes your website and it includes your instruction for use. And so since some of you might need a procedure like this, I thought I would show you what's in there, and that might give you some ideas of the things that we use as tools to help us make sure that we haven't missed any of the requirements for a label or instruction for use. So let me share that with you. The first document I'm going to share with you is the actual procedure. So if you bought Procedure 30, it used to be our labeling and translation procedure, because we saw more and more need for better quality translations and control over translation services. We decided to split those two. There's actually even a standard for translation services. So we've now split that out as a separate procedure. It's now SYS-52, and that's available for sale. And our labeling procedure is SYS-30. If you happen to purchase our procedure for labeling and translation prior to I think it's Wednesday or Thursday of this week, then you will get the combined procedure. We will provide that to you. If you purchase just the labeling procedure in the future, you will just get that, and you would have to buy the translation procedure separately. But people that bought the labeling and translation procedure combined will get continuous updates to the labeling procedure. But for translation, that's going to be a separate procedure from now on. One of the things that we've done in our procedures that's new, we've done this for a few months now at least, we started adding color coding and cross-references to requirements in the standards. And this was an idea that Matthew Walker came up with. When we go through certification audits with notified bodies and MDSAP auditors and the FDA, they're often looking for, where can I find this requirement in your procedure? And we found if we put in parentheses, this clause is met by this requirement here, that helps. And having it color coded makes it jump out off the page a little bit. And then the other thing that I realized I just forgot in this procedure, because I was working on this late last night, I need to add this symbol. We're using symbols for anybody that's colorblind. So there will be an exclamation point after these two clauses to indicate that these are specific to this ISO 1345 standard, in case you can't see blue as a color and can't differentiate it between the rest of the black text. So this particular procedure is meeting the design of labeling requirements. So design and development of devices is covered under 7.3, but 7.3.4 is the output clause. So design outputs would be, one of those would be instruction for use or labeling. So that requirement is met here, at least in part. And then labeling control is covered under 7.5.1E. It's just one of the bullets in 7.5.1, which is production and process controls. And that's where you'll find the requirement for labeling controls. And then we have a nice long list of all these other standards here. We have both the European regulations, the MDR and the IVDR. We have the Canadian medical device regulation. We have the FDA's requirements for labeling. We have a brand new standard that we're going to talk about during the presentation on EN ISO 20417 2021. So this is requirements for information provided by the manufacturer. If you're wondering how we keep track of all these revisions, most companies, they'd have revision A, revision B, revision C, and they would send it through their document control process. Since Medical Device Academy, even though we create quality system procedures, we don't have ISO certification ourselves. And it would be confusing for all our customers to have different versions A, B, C, D out there. We did something different. We put a draft at the end. So A is going to be whenever you implement a new quality system from us, you're always going to start with A. But the way we keep track of our own versions is we have a draft number. So this is draft 5, and draft 6 is going to have those corrections with the symbol after these two clauses and having the title after 2417 as a standard. Another standard that was updated was the symbol standard. We're going to talk about that during the presentation as well. We have an instruction for use template. I'm going to be updating that and sending that out as a follow-up to this presentation. And then we have our labeling template. And then we have two checklists that we use, and I'm going to show those in a second. But one of the big changes here is showing much more detail in the inputs and outputs of the labeling process. You have design controls as one of the inputs, your design control procedure, your risk management procedure, your usability procedure. All three of those work together in parallel in order to develop your design outputs, which include labeling. And then once you've created your label, now you have to review and approve that label. You do that under the change control procedure. That's design change control, not document change control. Our document change control procedure is SYS-1, but because labeling is a design output and it's controlled in a DMR in a technical file, you want to be using the design change control procedure, which is different. You're also going to have production process control is an output of this, because after you have a label template that's reviewed and approved, now you're going to have to preprint those labels, add variable data. You're going to have to review and approve the label that's actually printed, include it with your DHR, show evidence of inspection of it, and reconcile labels when you're done with your production lots. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well later on in this procedure. The technical documentation, all your approved labels go in your technical files or your DMR if you have US only. We tend to use the same DMR technical file index for both purposes rather than maintaining two separate documents. Here's your change notice. So that's the actual form that you approve, review, and approve the labels on. And then you have your checklist that I'm going to show you shortly. And then you have your tech file index or DMR index. We have a template for that. And then your packaging instructions, they're going to tell you where to put your parts in the package. So does your instruction for use go inside the sterile barrier, outside the sterile barrier, on the outside of the box? Where does it go? So that should be spelled out. And how do you keep track of, do they get one for all languages? Do they get one just for the languages in their country? Is it printed on demand? How do you do that? Other things that people might not be used to including in a labeling procedure would be this usability. And we're going to talk quite a bit about that during the presentation on how to create instruction for use. Whenever you purchase one of our procedures, not only do you have to delete this draft, but you need to put your name there, not ours, because you're going to make some edits to the procedure, and you want to indicate that you're the author of the procedure under the revision history and release it as revision A. You're going to have to probably change titles so they match the titles in your organization. And wherever you see something like in brackets company name, you're going to replace that with your company name, and you're going to replace the logo. And that's common to all our procedures. To show you a little bit here, this first section is about labeling. So we talk about the different parts of labeling, the IFU, the label. We talk about it has to be reviewed and approved, but then it has to be put in your DHF, in your technical file and DMR. We talk about where the IFU would be located in your product. We talk about the regulatory requirements. We talk about the checklists that are used. We talk about the use of symbols whenever possible. This also eliminates the need to translate a lot of documentation by using the symbols. And it makes it easier to understand in all kinds of countries. And then we have this section that explains when you use symbols, what you have to include in your instruction for use. So there's a requirement to have a glossary of what your symbols mean. And the FDA has recently said it's not sufficient just to put, RX only and then say prescription only next to it, explain what that RX only symbol means. You have to do more than that. They actually have 4 things that they want you to include here. I've split it up into 5 different things here, but it's basically 4 different titles of what they require. You're putting in the symbol, you're putting the name of the symbol, the title and designation number of the symbol, and then you're going to have the meaning and explanation of the text. And here's an example of how that would look. So you'd have RX only here. You would have the title of where what regulation is applicable and what particular subsection of that regulation is applicable for that RX only. You have the title and reference number. Here, RX only doesn't actually have a reference number, but if this were from another standard, it would have a reference number. And then the meaning is over here. And then we go in a little bit more detail down here. We talk about use of usability procedures. So we talk about creating a use-related risk analysis. We talk about critical tasks. We talk about usability summative validation to validate that the instruction for use can be understood and followed correctly by the person. And the user interface for the devices prevents use errors. And then we talk about printing control. So now we're getting into the actual printing of a label and how do you control that? We cover the labels first, and then we cover the instruction for use second. There's still 3 little bullets here about translation, but it's really pointing you to this procedure, SYS-030. But we do talk about how you would keep track of the different translations by adding a 2-letter code at the end. And then we talk about website content, which is also considered part of labeling, and how you need to make sure that you have a regulatory review of that. Then we talk about monitoring and measuring of the labeling process, and it focuses on labeling controls. Then we have training and retraining requirements. Once again, change the titles. We have risk management activities, how we prevent errors in the labeling process. And then we talk about the records that are required for labeling. And every single one of these would be a record in our quality system. So that's a comprehensive overview of what's in the labeling procedure. So I'll close that. And then I'm going to share one of our checklists. This is how we document the review and approval of a check of a label or instruction for use by the FDA and Health Canada. We put the requirement on the left-hand side. We put a cross-reference to the requirement by clause or section here. Then we say whether the label meets that requirement, yes or not applicable. If it's no, then you need to fix that. But you can also write comments over here. If you wanted to add a no column, I suppose you could, but you're not going to release the label like that. This is intended to be attached to that Form 12, which is the design change control form, and you would be approving each label, and this would show how you reviewed all the regulatory requirements. And it goes on here it goes on to a second page, and then we get into another set of requirements. This is subpart B of 801. Then we have subpart C of 801. And then we have additional special requirements that might be applicable to certain devices. For instance, if you had CFCs, this would be chlorofluorocarbons. If you had ozone, glasses, so any of these titles here, they give you an idea in the title what specific devices they would be applicable to, but you'd have to look up that particular section of the regulation and make sure you meet those requirements as well. And this is for Health Canada. These are Canadian requirements. And then we have a very similar document. I'm going to share the screen for that. This is for the European medical device requirements, and we have it specifically for the MDR. I haven't created one yet for the IVDR, but that will be created later on this year, probably in the next month or two. Our goal is to have that done by May, in time for the rollout of the IVDR requirements. But once again, you have the requirements on the left, the section reference here, you have a column for yes, not applicable, and comments. And so we go through 23.1, which is general requirements, 23.2 for information on the label, 23.3 is the next section. For this, we're talking about sterile packaging labels, and then 23.4 instruction for use. And that's the longest set of requirements, and it goes on for quite a few pages. So every single requirement of instruction for use can be found in 23.4. And this is instead of buying a standard, if you wanted to, you could base everything off of what the European requirements are. It's the European MDR, which is regulation 2017-745. So if you just type into your Google browser, regulation 2017-745, you will come up with this. You go to Annex 1, and you look for the very end of Annex 1, it's 23.4, has all the requirements for what has to be in for instruction for use. And you can use that as your guide to make sure that you haven't missed anything for what's required in instruction for use. And we use those checklists to document that.